Have you ever done something that you genuinely did not understand? Not a lapse in judgment, not a moment of weakness you can explain away. Something more disturbing than that. A pattern, a way of sabotaging exactly what you want most. A recurring anger that arrives without invitation and seems to belong to someone you do not fully recognize. A drive that feels both completely yours and strangely beyond your control. Rollo May was an American existential psychologist who spent his career trying to understand exactly this. The parts of us that feel most unfamiliar are not foreign to us, he argued. They are, in fact, the parts we know least about, and therefore the parts most likely to be running the show. He called this force the Daimonic, and his insight about it may be the most honest thing anyone has said about why human beings do what they do. Stay with me. Rollo May was born in 1909 Inches, Ohio. His early life was turbulent, a difficult family, an absent mother, a father who moved them repeatedly. He studied in Greece, trained as a psychoanalyst in New York under Erich Fromm, and spent years as a close friend and intellectual companion of Paul Tillich, whose work we have explored in a previous video. In his 30s, May contracted tuberculosis. He spent 3 years in a sanatorium not knowing whether he would live. During those years, he made an observation that would shape everything he wrote afterward. He noticed that the patients who passively accepted their condition, who became, in his word, innocent, tended to deteriorate, while those who asserted something, who pushed back against the illness with genuine force, often survived. He recognized this as the first time he had directly encountered what he would later call the daimonic, the force within a person that refuses to be extinguished. May borrowed the word from the ancient Greeks. A daimon, not demon, with its purely evil connotation, was a spirit that belonged to both realms, the divine and the destructive, the creative and the catastrophic. Socrates described his daimon as a voice that guided him. Goethe described it as the force that drove his creative life. The ancient world understood that the most powerful things in human experience were neither simply good nor simply evil. May applied this to psychology. The daimonic, he wrote, is any natural function which has the power to take over the whole person. It can be either destructive or creative, and it is usually both. This is not about evil. May was careful here. The daimonic is not pathology. It is not the worst parts of yourself. It is the most powerful parts, the drives and impulses and forces that carry enough energy to override everything else. Anger, sexuality, the need for recognition, the drive to create, the desire to connect. Any of these, unintegrated, can take over. Any of these, consciously worked with, can become the source of the most meaningful things you will ever do. The question, May argued, is not whether you have these forces. You do. Everyone does. The question is whether you are aware of them or whether they are aware of you. May identified a particular danger that is especially common in cultures that prize niceness, positivity, and the managed self, what he called the denial of the daimonic. When you refuse to acknowledge the darker, more powerful forces within yourself, the anger, the ambition, the grief, the need, they do not disappear. They go underground. And underground, they operate without your oversight. This is what produces the specific bafflement of someone who has done something they genuinely cannot explain. The affair in a stable marriage, the sabotage of a promotion they wanted, the explosion at the person they love most, the withdrawal from the very thing they said they wanted. The force that was denied has found another exit. May connected this directly to Jung's concept of the shadow, though he saw the daimonic as something broader and less differentiated. Where Jung's shadow is a relatively autonomous splinter of personality, May's daimonic is the entire system of powerful drives operating beneath the surface. The shadow is what you have rejected. The daimonic is everything that has not yet been integrated. He was particularly concerned with one form of denied daimonic, rage. In his 1972 book, Power and Innocence, May argued that violence in individuals and in societies is almost always the product of powerlessness. When a person feels that they have no legitimate avenue for expression, no way to matter, no way to assert their existence, the daimonic force of that suppressed need will eventually erupt not because they are evil, but because the energy had nowhere else to go. He saw this in his clinical work constantly. The patient who described himself as calm and conflict avoidant, who could not understand why his relationships kept ending in explosions. The person who had spent years being agreeable and who suddenly found themselves consumed by a rage they had no words for. The individual who had denied their ambition so thoroughly that they had become bitter without knowing why. The daimonic, denied, does not become smaller. It becomes less visible. And the things that operate without your awareness have a particular power over you precisely because you cannot see them. Innocence, May argued, is not virtue. It is the state of not knowing what lives inside you. And the price of that not knowing is paid, eventually, in ways that are very difficult to predict and very difficult to explain. Here is what May did not want us to miss: the part that most conversations about the shadow, the unconscious, or the dark side of human nature consistently understate. The daimonic is also the source of everything you have ever created. The same energy that produces rage, when channeled, produces passion. The same drive that makes a person relentlessly self-sabotaging, when turned toward meaningful work, makes them unstoppable. The same force that erupts as jealousy, when understood, reveals what you love so much that you cannot bear to lose it. If something in this video is landing, if you recognize this force in yourself, and you have spent years not knowing what to call it, this channel exists for exactly this. Subscribe to the Lucid Mind. Not as a habit, but as a companion for the kind of thinking that most places do not make room for. May saw creativity as the constructive expression of the daimonic, not art in the narrow sense, but any act in which a person brings their full force into contact with the world. The person who argues not to win but because they care deeply about something true. The relationship that is difficult because both people are genuinely present, genuinely complicated, genuinely alive to each other. The work that takes everything you have because it means something to you that you cannot entirely explain. This is why, May observed, the people who are most creatively alive tend to also be the most emotionally intense. Not because intensity is a sign of dysfunction, but because they have allowed more of the daimonic into consciousness rather than less. They have not made peace with their inner life by quieting it. They have made peace with it by engaging it. He also observed the reverse, the specific flatness that descends on a person who has spent years suppressing the daimonic in the name of stability, the life that is functional and unremarkable, the relationship that is comfortable and a little dead, the person who has successfully eliminated all the rough edges and, in doing so, has also eliminated the energy that made them most fully themselves. The daimonic is not the part of you that needs to be managed. It is the part of you that needs to be known. May's most culturally relevant diagnosis was not about violence. It was about apathy. In Love and Will, written in 1969, May described what he saw happening in American culture and what he argued was a crisis more fundamental than political or economic problems. People, he observed, were losing the capacity to feel, not through trauma or loss, but through a slow, voluntary withdrawal from engagement. He defined apathy as the withdrawal of will and love, a suspension of commitment, and he connected it directly to the denial of the daimonic. When you suppress enough of your inner life in the name of safety, what remains is not peace, it is numbness. The numbness is easy to mistake for contentment. It feels stable, It does not hurt in any specific way. But it is, May argued, one of the most dangerous conditions a person can be in because it progressively reduces your capacity to be affected by anything, which reduces your capacity to respond to anything, which ultimately reduces your capacity to be genuinely present to your own life. He made an observation that has stayed with me. There is a dialectical relationship between apathy and violence. To live in apathy provokes violence because when a person is sufficiently empty of genuine engagement, the daimonic eventually forces contact in the most direct way available. Not necessarily physical violence, but the eruption of suppressed force in any form, the relationship destroyed, the opportunity sabotaged, the moment of cruelty that seemed to come from nowhere. The antidote to apathy, for May, was not enthusiasm, not positivity or optimization or motivation. It was will, the deliberate choice to engage, even when engagement is uncomfortable. To allow yourself to be moved by what matters to you. To permit the daimonic to express itself through conscious participation in your own life, rather than to suppress it until it finds its own way out. Will, he wrote, is the ability to organize oneself in order to achieve one's goals. But beneath that definition is something more essential: the decision to be present, to show up fully, to allow your force to be directed rather than suppressed. The goal of the work May was describing is not to eliminate the daimonic. He was explicit about this. A person who has successfully suppressed all their difficult drives is not psychologically healthy. They are psychologically emptied. The daimonic is the source of energy, and you cannot selectively remove the source of destructive energy without also removing the source of creative energy, because they are the same source. Integration is the word May used, and integration means something specific: bringing the daimonic into consciousness, developing a relationship with it, learning to direct it rather than being directed by it. This is harder than suppression. Suppression is clean and efficient. You push it down, you keep moving, and it stays quiet for a while. Integration requires you to sit with the uncomfortable fact that you contain within you forces that could go either way, that your anger is the same material as your passion, that your jealousy is the same material as your love, that the drive that makes you difficult is the drive that makes you capable. May proposed a practical question for this work. When you experience an intense feeling, particularly one that feels overwhelming or disproportionate, instead of managing it, ask, "What is this trying to tell me?" Not, "How do I make this stop?" but, "What is underneath this? What does this amount of energy indicate about what I actually value?" This is close to what Jung called shadow work, the deliberate examination of what you have rejected in yourself. But May's framing is warmer, less adversarial. The daimonic is not your enemy. It is your most unruly ally. It is carrying something you need, something about who you are and what you care about that your more managed self has not been willing to claim. You do not integrate the daimonic by understanding it abstractly. You integrate it by encountering it in specific, ordinary moments. Today, at some point, you will have a feeling that is slightly larger than the situation seems to warrant, a flash of anger at something small, a disproportionate longing, a sudden flatness where energy should be, a moment of wanting to withdraw from something you said you wanted. When that happens, instead of moving immediately to manage or suppress or explain it away, try something different. Pause and ask, with genuine curiosity rather than self-accusation, what is carrying this much energy? What does this amount of feeling indicate about what I actually care about? You do not need to resolve it. You do not need to act on it. You simply need to look at it long enough to recognize it, to say in some internal way, "I see you. You are mine." You are not going to run this situation without my awareness. That acknowledgement, May argued, is the beginning of integration. Not the resolution of the daimonic, which is neither possible nor desirable, but the beginning of a conscious relationship with the most powerful forces in your own life. The daimonic does not disappear when it is seen, but it does, slowly, begin to work with you rather than in spite of you. Rollo May spent his career at the intersection of the most difficult questions. Why do people do what they do, even when it contradicts what they want? Why does the force that produces violence and the force that produces great art come from the same place in the human psyche? His answer, the daimonic, is not a comfortable one. It asks you to accept that you contain more than you have been willing to acknowledge. That the parts of you that feel most foreign are, in fact, the most intimate. That the work of becoming yourself is not the work of becoming better, but of becoming more fully known to yourself. If that work sounds like something you want to keep doing, subscribe to the Lucid Mind. Think deeper, live clearer,